Guys, I want to thank the following sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com, my friend Cody Nelson of 25 plus years. I call him the glassing guru. He's the optics authority. He's the optics manager at GoHunt.com Gear Shop. If you guys have any interest in purchasing optics at all or have any questions, give Cody a call directly at 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also email him directly at optics@gohunt.com or call him or text him on his cell phone, 602-399-3699. I want to thank GoHunt Optics Department for their sponsorship of this podcast. I also want to thank the GoHunt Insider. Remind you guys that if you go to gohunt.com/JScott, you're going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card just for signing up. I also want to thank KUIU Ultralight Hunting. You can find out more about KUIU, which is the gear that I wear on all of my hunts. I also wear it on my fishing trips. Pretty much everything I wear. You can go to their website, which is KUIU.com, KUIU.com, to find out more. It's also a direct-to-consumer website, so you won't find this in any retailers. You can order directly off the website. Go to KUIU.com, KUIU.com. Phonescope.com, use the JScott20 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount on all orders. Guys, I also want to tell you about a new sponsor of the podcast, Kyle Lynch, who is also a former Army Ranger who served with the 2nd Battalion, the 75th Ranger Regiment in Iraq and Afghanistan. Kyle has also been a deputy sheriff and volunteer firefighter, and he is really involved on the tactical side. He is actually co-owner of a company based in Georgia called Armageddon Gear. They do a ton of stuff that serves the military and commercial, tactical, and competitive shooting markets. But he has designed a really cool elk call carrier, and he's launched a new website called allelk.com. Go check out the Bugle Mule. The Bugle Mule is a mouth call elk call carrier that is he's made it where it fits right out on the outside of a bugle tube. It carries up to 3 calls. Go check it out at allelk.com. For a limited time, the J. Scott Outdoors podcast listeners can get a 10% discount there at allelk.com. Put in the promo code JSO10 for 10% off. I want to thank allelk.com. I want to thank Kyle for his service to our country, and I want to thank him for the sponsorship of this podcast. Guys, without these podcast sponsors, I wouldn't be able to put the amount of time that I do into this. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank you. Let's get right into the episode.
Hey, y'all, I'm KC.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is the elk hunting series from the Element Podcast.
If you want to get on elk, it helps to hang with dudes that know elk.
And that ain't us, but luckily the dudes that know elk have cell phones, and we called them up.
So whether you're a veteran of September or you're just cutting your ivories in the elk woods, you're going to hear something here that'll help you get the full draw this fall.
If you find this podcast helpful, poke that subscribe button and go check out our elk hunting playlist on YouTube. Now let's rock and roll! All right, guys, on the phone today, we have got Jay Scott with J. Scott Outdoors. Jay, what is happening, man?
How are you guys? I'm happy to be here. For sure, it's kind of crazy times, but I'm happy to be on the phone with you guys to talk a little elk hunting for sure.
Yeah, man, awesome. We appreciate it. We always like to talk elk hunting this time of year. Like you said, it is crazy. What is even crazier, honestly, is how the draw statistics and OTC stuff is going to go this year, because it seems like it's going to be a crazy year in the elk woods with people everywhere and people not drawing when they thought they should have drawn. Did you see that too?
You know, I didn't dig into it probably as much as I should have, but I do know with, people feeling all cooped up, I think that there's going to be a bunch of people in the OTC woods in the different states for sure, where they can just buy a tag and get out there and go hunt. I think definitely, I think we saw a little bit of this in turkey season across the U.S. where, especially in the Southeast, there were way more turkeys, days in the field, a lot of pressure on those turkeys. So I think it's going to be pretty much similar thing. with the elk hunting. I think a lot of guys, some of the big trips, maybe to the Northwest Territories or Alaska, or, some of the bigger sheep hunt type trips maybe got, delayed and postponed till next year. And so I think a lot of people are going to go either archery deer hunting or archery elk hunting and just try and get in the woods for sure. So I think it's something that people need to kind of keep in mind and consider when maybe they're considering their time frame when they're going to go hunt, and just make sure that they understand that, probably the weekends are going to get a lot of pressure. And so they might want to focus a little bit more, during the week, and, position themselves where maybe the pressure will work to their advantage, and they can take advantage of, some of those days when there's not as many hunters in the field.
Yeah, for sure. What are you noticing out there? You're in Colorado for your summer, I would imagine, and doing a lot of fishing from what I see on Instagram. Are you noticing more or less people than normal?
As far as fishing, it pretty much seems like the same. I will tell you, it seems like the guide trips where, you see a guy rowing and a fisherman in the front, fisherman in the back. It seems like those overall, I've been over to Utah fishing at the Green, and, kind of fishing all over here in Colorado, but it seems like those guide trips are down. But it seems like, the everyday trips from the DIY guy seems every bit as much pressure as normal. Interesting here in Colorado, as much as well as a lot of the Southwest, is we're got a really dry summer monsoon. The monsoons have really not come yet, and it's been really, really dry. I got here after my Gould's turkey hunts down in Mexico about May 15th. My wife and I spend pretty much the winters in Arizona, in that Scottsdale Paradise Valley area, and then we come up here in the Roaring Fork Valley as soon as I get done with those turkey hunts in Mexico, and got here about May 15th. And, didn't have a very big snowpack year, and it seemed like that a lot of the snow had already melted. Had kind of a warm late April, early May, and, all the rivers are what I would say at right now, July 15th, they're probably what they normally are flow-wise August 15th. So we're in desperate need of water, and, a lot of the rivers that I float are getting close to possibly being where they're not going to be floatable here much more than about a week. So, definitely some monsoon rains would help a lot of that, as well as, I was over at the Odd Six Ranch, checking trail cameras and putting up a bunch of new trail cameras, and it's really, really dry over there as well. And that's about 4 hours away. And, just Colorado in general is very, very dry right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's a much different year than last year. I was up there in the summer last year, and then we hunted New Mexico for the fall, and there was still snow late July. At like 9,500 foot, there was still snow drifts. It was a crazy, snow year last year, and it just seems like it's almost like
the exact opposite.
Yeah, the ebb and flow is harder.
Last year, all the rivers that I fish here, kind of in central Colorado, to be honest with you, a lot of them weren't even really fishable, where, the dry flight pockets were open up on the banks until about the 15th of July. Now we're looking at almost kind of being shut down here on the 15th of July. So it's just amazing to see two totally different years. One of the interesting things that I saw happen in 18 and then in 19, over there at the Odd Six Ranch, where I'm the hunt manager, is actually in 18, when we had really dry conditions, very similar to this year we're having. It seemed like our antler growth was actually better, which is kind of totally different than what I'm used to in Arizona. And then last year, with having such a big winter snowfall year, but even more than that, a big spring snow, and it stayed cold for so long. I think those bulls did not do as well last year, and the antlers were actually smaller on. I have a good sense of it because we're able to run 150 or so trail cameras and have bulls that we watch year after year on the Odd Six, and can watch their antler growth from one year to another. And actually, most of the bulls across the board were better in the fall of 2018 than they were last year in the fall of 2019. And the only thing that I can attribute that to is the fact that those bulls on that really wet, cold big moisture year last year, they didn't get started on green feed early enough just because it was still so cold and it didn't green up. Whereas the year before, in 18, we had, very dry conditions, but enough moisture in the ground that, the green grass came early and those bulls were able to get on that feed. And it comes down to a number of, antler growing days. And I think if they can get on green feed early enough, I just think this year's probably going to be another good antler growth. It's a little too early to tell. A lot of the bigger bulls were, kind of finished out, but some of my cameras weren't running and such, so I don't have a big enough sampling here in another couple weeks when I get to see a broader sampling of a bunch of bulls that I know. I'll be able to see if my conclusion was correct. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for those that are looking at hunting Colorado, I think it's going to be a good elk antler growth year, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
definitely in Arizona, we had a really good winter moisture in Arizona, and so the elk antlers in Arizona should be phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. In the whitetail world, there are some studies that actually show kind of a similar thing to what you're talking about, where people always talk about spring rains and these timely rains and that kind of thing, and of course timely rains are a little bit different than just overall rainfall, but that when the landscape is a bit stressed, that a deer will a lot of times pick the most nutritionally beneficial forbs and different browse and that kind of thing.
Sure.
So, then when they know, it's kind of like, I think about it this way. I used to tour in a band for about 10 years, and we, when we would stop late at night, in the middle of the night at a convenience store, I really wasn't thinking about can I get some lettuce or something like that? I was like, okay, what's the cheapest thing?
And Twinkies.
That's exactly right. Like things that are going to fill my stomach up for $2 or less. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I get like chocolate milk and Pop-Tarts because Pop-Tarts are like 79 cents. Yeah.
And that Pop-Tarts can stay on the shelf for like 40 years and they never disintegrate or they break down. That should
They're still in my stomach.
Right there.
They're still in my stomach.
That's why we're still full.
Yeah. That's I try not to eat too many anymore, but it's hard to beat a Pop-Tart at about 8:30 in the morning in a deer stand sometimes.
I hear you. My favorite is the cinnamon flavored, and I like to pull all the crust off that doesn't have any of the cinnamon sugar on it, throw that away and eat the
That's what you give the chipmunks. Yeah. That's funny.
Changing subject real fast, but I totally agree with you on the fact that I think we learn a lot from our whitetail friends, and watching whitetail deer, and it's probably the most monitored animal in the United States. But I think you're dead on. Something that just popped into my mind was a couple years ago, you guys had done a video down in the Gunnison Gorge. I think it was both of you where you hiked in and
Yes, sir.
And caught some fish on salmon flies, and I still remember that video. That was a cool video. Interesting. The water in the Gunnison this year was so low. It's the first year in a handful of years that I didn't go do my normal trips, salmon fly trips and such, floating down there, just because the water was only like at 450 CFS, and a lot of the guide boats kind of were stacked on top of each other, and it was just a pretty fast hatch because of the water temperature. When that water is normally up 1,000 or 1,200 CFS, the water stays a lot colder, and so that hatch moves a lot slower. This year it just blew through the canyon really, really fast because of warm water temperatures compared to a normal year where they have twice as much volume of water. And so a lot of my buddies were all reporting that those salmon flies were normally, they kind of progress and kind of move upstream. They just kind of were blowing up all over the river, and then they were just done. But I still love watching that video you guys did. You did a really good job.
Thanks,
on that.
man.
Thanks, Jay. It means a lot, man. That was probably one of the hardest things to actually, do production on, but also one of the most fun videos that Tyler and I have ever made. You can imagine packing 70 pounds of camera gear to the bottom of the Gunnison Gorge. It was pretty nuts, but a lot of fun. So on that, low water side of things, is that something where, You know, a lot of times we think about elk and public land being kind of going hand in hand. You manage a very large piece of private land. Are elk that are, you know, managed privately affected by water as much? Or since y'all, you know, really monitor your tanks and that sort of thing, do you feel like elk aren't as stressed when in low water situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think on situations where you've got good access to water, whether it be, you know, creeks or tanks or things like that, as far as drinking water, I think, you know, I think a lot of these private ranches do a really good job of keeping the wildlife into the water. I think more than anything, when you start talking about dry conditions, in Colorado, it's not necessarily like dry conditions in Arizona. When we have dry conditions in Arizona, literally like all of the dirt tanks are dry, the trick tanks are dry. The Arizona Elk Society actually has to get a water truck and start hauling water to the trick tanks. Colorado, on the other hand, doesn't, even in dry years, doesn't face that. You know, they still have a lot of perennial streams, a lot of moving water, you know, creeks that still have water flowing in them. Granted, it may not be flowing as much as normal, but as far as elk being able to get a drink, they definitely still, across most of the landscape in Colorado, have a chance to definitely get drinking water. Mm-hmm. I think when you talk about dry years, you talk about more about, you know, the grass isn't really growing and the nutrients in the soil and what they're eating isn't as good. You know, and that's more of a concern than, say, drinking water. Whereas in Arizona, and New Mexico for that matter, I mean, there are actually times when, you know, in Unit 9 in Arizona, they're actually hauling water, and there's elk, there's bulls standing at the drinker waiting for the water because it's, you know, so few and far between. And that's where it becomes a problem for sure if they can't get enough water to drink, but definitely usually not the case in Colorado.
Yeah. Is that like, do you look at that and think, you know, maybe elk shouldn't be on that landscape? You know, like,
well, it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely something that if you know, a lot of years when it's really dry in Arizona, if man didn't step in, that they would either have to really move and congregate somewhere else, or that, you know, they could face they could face dehydration, they could face where they just can't get a drink of water, and I would say it's not super common. And I would say that as well, I think the Arizona Elk Society does a great job of trying to keep water widespread, with the fear a lot of times when there's not a lot of water and sources, you get those elk congregated up, you can get disease and you can get predation. You know, when every animal within a 5-mile radius has to water in one spot, it becomes pretty easy picking for the predators. Mm-hmm. So I think that's more of a concern. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in the elk refuge. And, you know, if they didn't supplement feed those elk, a lot of times would they die off? The answer is probably yes. So, I mean, it is an interesting role that man plays. But I like to think that overall we do a pretty good job of trying to conserve and protect, the animals that we love to hunt out there. And I am one of these believers that I think there's times when man needs to step in and do the best they can to kind of help the animals. Mm-hmm. I'm not one so much to just say, "Oh, just let them do whatever they're going to do, and if they make it, they make it. If they don't, they don't." Well, it's a pretty easy solution to, you know, supplement them with some water, and in the case of the elk in Jackson Hole, you know, supplement them with a little bit of feed to get them through a couple of weeks of those rough winters. Mm-hmm. You know, because they are animals that we all love to see out on the landscape, for sure.
We just talked about that with another buddy of ours, Adam Keith, who more whitetail-oriented guy, but we were having this discussion on, like, you know, what the dominion of man is exactly and how that looks, and how it's not just, like, dominating the landscape. It's to take God's creation and help it be as the best that a man can make it. You know what I mean?
Flourish.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
sure. And I think overall, I think a lot of the conservation organizations that are around do a really good job. And I think it's we're in a weird time right now with a lot of these. I know the National Wild Turkey Federation, although the turkeys have really flourished across the country. This COVID-19 has really hurt the fundraising. A lot of the spring fundraisers were closed, and it's tough to see a lot of these organizations really suffering for funds and revenue that didn't come in. So everybody that's listening, kind of keep that in mind. If you're Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, or if you're Wild Sheep Foundation, or Rocky Mountain Goat, Turkey, whatever it may be, maybe send them an extra $50 or something, and because they're really in need right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the things that is good about people being stir crazy and wanting to go hunting is that you will see an uptick in license sales and habitat stamps and all that. So maybe that'll not the NGOs will benefit from that, but at least the wildlife departments and stuff across the U.S. will at least benefit from high tag sales and whatnot. So that side of the conservation will be kind of preserved through the whole deal there. So. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at the OT6?
Yeah, so the OT6 is a really interesting situation. A friend of mine in 2017 lives in Texas, had told me that him and his wife wanted to purchase a ranch and really love elk and mule deer, and they ended up buying a ranch in kind of south central Colorado. And it's approximately 50,000 acres. And they pulled the majority of the cattle off of the property and wanted to really make it as much of an elk preserve and sanctuary as possible. And when I say preserve, sanctuary, just basically giving those elk free rein to range the property and feed and do their thing. And, so they asked me in 2017, they didn't end up purchasing it until mid-September, asked me to kind of step in on October and come kind of take inventory at the ranch and see what kind of elk are there, and numbers of elk, ages of elk, size of elk, and kind of, spend a month running trail cameras and glassing and just seeing what they have. And then so that, kind of has transformed on the hunt manager over there, and my friends all give me a hard time because we don't do many hunts, so they say I'm a hunt manager of a place that doesn't hunt. But we do shoot a few elk every year, and I've got a kid, Hunter Meekum. He's in his mid-20s. He works with me over there, and we basically run about 150 or so trail cameras. We glass morning and evenings, video, photograph, and just kind of keep tabs on the wildlife on the ranch. And, we've got a good population of elk and some mule deer, lots of bears, turkey, mountain lion. And it's just a really neat opportunity for someone like myself who, guided in Arizona for 20 years in the biggest bull state in the country, and really got a good feel of public land hunting and guiding on public land. And, now getting to just monitor and witness these elk in their, natural environment, doing their thing, rutting and chasing cows. I'm only there kind of during the rut. So from about September 1 till about mid-October full time. And we're out every single day, morning and evening. And, when we're not glassing at prime time, we're checking trail cameras during the day. And, we've got an Instagram page, OT6 Ranch, and, just try and post mainly pictures of elk doing their thing. So it's a lot of fun. You get to, they bugle really good and get a lot of great video and a lot of great photos for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. And it's a lot of fun just to watch what y'all have going on down there. I follow that OT6 page, and it's just cool to see giant bulls and elk doing what they do. And I believe last year y'all took one of your well-known bulls off of that place, didn't you?
Yeah, so in 2018 we had a bull show up that we actually did not see. Hunter thought maybe he might have seen him in 2017 in mid-October. But then he didn't show up. We didn't really start seeing him until the fall of 18. And that was the quote unquote drought year. And he grew a heck of a set of antlers. And we ended up a year later harvesting them last season. But, it was really fun in 18 to get to spend probably 30 days with that bull and get lots of video and lots of trail cam photos and just kind of watch him. And, he was probably pushing close to 400 inches that year in 2018. And, a lot of people ask me how big I thought he was. Well, my experience is, 20 years is Arizona elk, some of the biggest elk in the world. But, being in Colorado, I just couldn't get over the fact that, that bull could potentially be mid 390s or better. And, so I kind of said, 370s, 380, and to make a long story short, last year in the fall of 2019, our expectations were pretty high to see what that bull would do. And he actually, he had 2 devil points off his eye guards that he didn't grow. Then he had a little G6 on I forget which side, but on one of his sides and didn't grow. And he just was kind of overall in the back a little bit smaller. I think he probably lost at least 15 inches or so. When you compare the rack, the video and pictures from the year before, I think he was probably in that 395 to 400 range. The owner's wife ended up killing him last year. And we knew that he was a little bit smaller, but it was still one of those bulls that, he's just a heck of a bull. And I think he ended up going like 384 or something like that. But just a beautiful, typical 6. And, it was bittersweet because, you spend enough time around watching and, in the season of 18, every morning, once we started getting pictures of that bull, it was like, where's Creed? And, where can we go to see him? And, he would move around the ranch and just trying to keep up with them. And then the anticipation into 2019 season was super high. Is he going to blow up, and be over 400? And, are those extra points going to blow up? And it turned out he just went clean, straight, typical 6. But it was still quite exciting trying to kind of position and get ourselves in the right spot to see him every day.
Yeah, that's cool. Did you now I understand, your years and years of outfitting and guiding, you probably did some of this, but that probably really, your position at Odd 6 has really allowed you to hone in on situations like that. Did you learn more about like bull pattern movements and whatnot because you're able to really follow that distinct bull around on the property that much, or is that something that you kind of have seen and learned throughout your years?
Yeah, I would say 20 years of guiding elk in Arizona on public land with lots of competition, taught me a lot of things about positioning and taught me about glassing and being up on a high point and, trying to fight the urge to get, 100 yards from them and get that really, really good video, but, stay away from them a little bit, stay up high and get where you can try and see him more times than not. Because a lot of times with these bulls, if you dive down in the trees with them, you're either going to bump them or, you may get that, once in a lifetime footage. But, with all of the public land hunting, and guiding that I've done in Arizona, whether it be elk or coos deer or bighorn sheep, whatever it may be, I've learned to really get into kind of a monitoring stage and kind of get where, hey, I want to get where I'm not going to bump them or disturb them, but where I can always see him. I can see where he comes out, where he's rutting around, and then where he goes into the trees. And then, a lot of times some of the best footage that we get is in the evening because we've spent the morning, watching exactly where him and his cows or other bulls are, going into the trees, which then sets us up for a great spot to be in the afternoon and move our position a little bit where we're going to be right on top of them when they come out of the trees. Because, a lot of times, unless elk are bumped, a lot of times wherever they go in the trees, they're going to come out that afternoon in that similar spot. And so, I'm a firm believer of glassing, off a tripod and long range glassing and letting the elk or whatever animal I'm pursuing. I don't want them to ever know I'm there until I'm killing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, you have to fight the urge. Whatever animal you're hunting, you have to fight the urge to get close to them until the time's right. And you up your percentage of being able to get them. And I don't think it's any different. If I lived in the Midwest, I'd be, probably doing the same thing with whitetails. But the least interference you can have with animals, the better chance you have when you go to put the press on them. That you're going to be successful by just staying away from them and learning everything you can about their movements. And if they go in this group of trees, they're going to come out of this group of trees. If they go north, they're going to come out in this completely different meadow. And just trying to understand their pattern and what they like to do, and being able to put yourself in the right position is huge.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm a firm believer in being efficient. Whether fishing or whatever I'm doing, I try and be as efficient as I possibly can.
That's why he's a streamer guy.
I like to rip lips for sure with streamers.
Yeah. So, you have learned a lot by guiding on public land in, Arizona for 20 years. And, that doesn't come easy. That knowledge that you've gained doesn't come easy. And I think, there's probably a lot of guys that are pretty hesitant to share that knowledge, or whatever knowledge they might have gained throughout their years of hunting and that kind of thing. And so, like as a guide or an outfitter, how much teaching are you doing, and how much are you being reserved and allowing somebody to learn, or just reserving it because you don't want somebody to come back in there and hunt your spot or whatever? Like, how much do you see that happen?
Well, one thing I try and do with my own podcast that I have is, almost 700 episodes now. I just try and basically anything that I know, I try and pass on and try and help people. And I'm, answering, 150 to 200 direct messages a week, and, emails, and trying to help people as much as I can. The biggest thing that I can do, hunting and fishing in the outdoors, has given me so much to be able to give back and to help other people. That's what I live for. With that being said, I think it's important to be aware as a guide, and even a DIY guy. The last thing you want to do with your fellow sportsmen is be, specifically giving up spots and giving up areas that may affect someone else's hunt. If it's my spot and I give it up, then I think I have the right to give that up if it's my spot and I found it and I don't ever see anybody else in there. But I do, and I have tried for many, many years to be very aware of other people's quote-unquote hunting holes and spots, and try and be respectful of not giving secrets where specifically some spot that you can go sit on a rock and see a 200-inch mule deer buck every time you go out. If someone tells me about something like that, the last thing I want to do is break that trust.
Sure.
So I always keep that in the back of my mind. But as far as trying to help, trying to give, the basis of my podcast is trying to give as much information and education with the guests that I have on, and try and pick their brain and give as much info to fellow sportsmen as I can. And that's kind of what I've built my whole platform of my podcast and Instagram on, is I'm constantly learning myself, and I love to pass on all the different things that I've learned. And the best message I can get from anyone is, hey, that tip you gave on your podcast or that tip you gave on your Instagram has helped me, kill this 5x5 bull elk with my bow. And I just wanted to tell you thanks. That to me is the ultimate. Mm-hmm. And that's the ultimate reward. And that's what, my podcast started in 2015, and it's been going a long time, and that's what drives it every day. That's what motivates me every day, is to help people out there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you helped me catch a 21-inch rainbow last fall, so I really appreciate that.
Oh, good.
Gave me a little tip. But I really do appreciate your podcast, man. It's something I listen to every year, and there's always stuff that's not really, my game, like the bighorn stuff or whatever, but there's always things that are just really, really informational, and I think that's what you do a great job of with your guests, is getting guys who really know what's going on. And that's why we want to talk to you, because you are the compilation of all of those. So that helps. So I think that there's a large sector of the hunting population out there that kind of gets overlooked, especially when you're talking about the Western game. The cool hot topic thing nowadays is, these popping words like public land and OTC, DIY, yeah, all that stuff. But quite honestly, for a large sector of people, that's probably kind of intimidating and maybe even not really achievable, depending on, physical requirements and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, and now I'll be candid, not really something I know that much about, but the outfitter world is really a great tool for a lot of people. So that's something that you know a ton about. So we kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Let me just first start by saying, what type of person should consider an outfitter when it comes to going on a Western hunt?
Well, before I answer that, I think I'd like to say that some of the best hunters I know, mm-hmm. and some of the best fishermen I know are outfitters. They're guides. They're guys that do it every day. They're guides. They're guys that really throw away, opportunities to have corporate jobs and make really, really good money, and they do what they love. And whether it be guiding fishermen or guiding hunters, some of the very best hunters and fishermen I know are guides. I want to say that first and foremost. But to answer your question, I think, I know what you mean when you talk about DIY and public land, and, you've got all these, this group and that group, and this group doesn't like this group and that group. It's all nonsense to me. We're all hunters. We all like to feel the wiggle of the rod tip, and we all like to see, we all like to eat whatever we're going to shoot and have that sport of hunting. So we're all in this together. But, the reality is, the guy that might look at getting an outfitter is someone that maybe skill-wise isn't as good. And then there's some guys that hire guides that are some of the best hunters I know. So they want to hire other people that are like-minded and that know what they're doing to put them in the best chance they can to succeed. I know a lot of guys that only have so much time, and they want to be efficient with their time, and they want to learn, and they want to be in position to be able to harvest a big mule deer buck or a big bull elk, or, at least get into bulls that are bugling. And so, it's one of those things that, with social media and stuff, one of the negative things is you kind of compartmentalize, and you get these groups that are, this group and that group, and you get bitterness, and you get all this different stuff going on. And I try and stay away from a lot of that nonsense, and, just encourage guys that, if you haven't had any success for the last 5 years, and you've, only heard one elk bugle in those 5 years, and you've never even had a bull elk inside of 50 yards, you might want to talk about hiring a guide or hiring an outfitter to be able to put you in position to potentially succeed. And, and that's one thing. If you hire an outfitter to take you fishing, a lot of times they're going to know the best flies to use. They're going to know when to switch from one fly to another because of something that's happened, whether it be water temperature or condition, or, potentially if you're high country mule deer hunting, that the guy knows exactly where you need to sit and when you need to move, and okay, in the afternoon we need to be over here, in the mornings we're going to glassing, and having a totally different strategy. And I would encourage guys to consider going with some of these great hunters and guides and learning. And then once they've done that for a year or two, or 5, or one hunt, a lot of times you can learn enough on one hunt that you kind of get it figured out. The reality is we're all trying to be successful, and we're all trying to have fun at what we're doing. So why not increase your odds of efficiency and success by, learning from someone that gets into, whether it be elk, deer, sheep, fish, whatever. And that's one thing I tell people a lot is, the 20 years of guiding in Arizona, one thing that's made me a pretty good elk caller is because of opportunity and the amount of time that I've sat and listened to elk calling. Well, if you're a guy that's been for 3, 4, 5 years and you love elk calling, but you've never had an interaction with an elk, you're never going to get better and you're never going to learn. I lived in the greatest elk state in the country in Arizona and spent 20 years in a row, the month of September, never took a day off, and basically monitored elk for 20 years for 30 days straight. And it got me a lot of at-bats, and those at-bats made me know when to call, when not to call, when to stalk, when to sneak, when to cow call, when to bugle. And it's circumstantial because of all the opportunities. It made me better at what I do. And so that's kind of my pitch out there for people that are maybe considering using a guide or an outfitter is, consider someone that's had a lot of interactions, and they're going to be able to get you in to good situations where you have a chance to succeed.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of guys want to think of this, the guy that goes on the outfitted trip as being what KC likes to call a big hunter, and not necessarily a guy that hunts a lot, but a guy that's a pretty big dude and needs somebody to help him get around the mountains, that kind of thing. And, to me, when you're starting out, there's not a better way to get a jump start into elk hunting than to learn a little bit from an outfitter, and then kind of take what you learn and morph it into your system and work that way on the OTC, lands and that kind of thing throughout. And there's a couple of things that, as you were talking there, I was thinking that are, important parts. People like to talk about the hunt is as big of a part of it as actually pulling the trigger. And let's not kid ourselves. Pulling the trigger is really fun. You know what I mean? That's the most climatic part that there is. That's the most, exciting moment of the trip is actually pulling, unless you get attacked by a grizzly or something, that'd be pretty exciting. But you know what I'm saying? And same thing, like you said, you like to feel the wiggle of the rod. I went on a trip, and KC tried to give me as much information as he could down to the bay here in Texas in March, and tried to catch fish, and I did not feel the wiggle of the rod at all. Luckily, there was crabs to be caught. But then recently, a couple weeks ago, my dad wanted to pay for us to go out on the bay with a guide, and me and my son and my dad went, and we caught a limit of flounder, and it was a blast, you know what I mean? And I didn't feel bad about the fact that I couldn't figure out flounder at all, and so I think there's that. There's also, there's a lot of guys that I talk to that have, they're like, man, I want to go elk hunting out west, but I can't find anybody to go with me. I just don't know anybody that wants to hunt with me. And it's like, a big part of the hunt is the camaraderie and that kind of thing for a lot of dudes. And a guide typically is pretty good at that. Guys that have that guide can gab a little bit, a lot of times. And so they're a fun guy to learn from. They're a person to hunt with and to enjoy a hunt with. And I've been on a few of these hunts as a video man for sheep and stuff like that. And, by the end of the trip, I can tell the hunter and the guide have a pretty unique connection and a friendship that can at least last through social media for a long time, So
for sure,
there's a lot of benefits to it, in my opinion. And I think, if nothing else, just learning, from a guide on your first trip can really get you to the point where maybe you get a shot at a bull every 3 or 4 years, as opposed to going 5 or 6 or 7 without, getting a shot. So to me, there's a lot of benefits. But I guess for me, there's another thing that you hear about, especially as being a Texan, is you get some bad experiences. People that are talking about their bad experiences on forums and that kind of thing with particular guides and outfits that are run. How do you avoid that? If you're going for your first time, and say that money is a pretty big leap of faith for you to put down $3,500 or $5,000 or whatever it might be. How do you assure yourself that you're picking a dude that's going to give you a good shot and also a good experience?
Well, I think one of the things, like anything else, a lot of the bad experiences that we all have heard about and hear about every year, honestly, are those situations where guys have tried to cut corners. And guys have hired guys that are at the cheapest of and I'm a firm believer of this, the least expensive guide a lot of times is not the best guide. That doesn't mean the most expensive guide is the best, but a lot of times, somewhere in the middle is where you want to be. And, I think there's nothing that speaks more volume on a guided hunt than references, and does the guy have people that you can call? And I'm not talking about like 2 guys. I'm talking about like, does he have a list of 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 people that you can call? And don't just call the first name on the list. Go down about 6 and call that guy, and go down about 14 and call that guy, and go down about 22 and call that guy. And you can get a real good sense pretty quick if the person you're going with is the real deal. I feel like a lot of these bad stories that we hear about are literally a lot of times the hunter's fault, in that they set the hunt up in a bad way, and they're trying to make someone something that they're not, and they're going the cheap route. I think a lot of times, whether it be fishing or hunting, call references, make sure you talk to people that have actually been with the actual guide you're going with. And if you do that, you're probably going to circumvent a lot of issues by talking to, 5, 6, 7, 10 guys that are like, yeah, I hunted with Joe Blow and he's phenomenal and he'll do, work his butt off for you. If a guy provides you a list of references and it's 3 people long, there's an issue. I mean, and granted, I started, new myself in the business, and so didn't have a long list of references like I do now. But at least if the person's honest and says, listen, I've only been guiding a year, but here's 2 guys that I have taken, call and talk to them and say, how does this person react when things aren't going well? How does this person act, in front of other hunters? How does this person act? Is he professional? How does he treat people walking by and on horseback, on other outfitters? And you can, with good questions, you can in about 15 minutes get a really good sense of who you're going to go with. And so I would say references is number 1. And like I get a lot of questions from young guides, and I say, listen, just because you're a great hunter does not make you a great guide. It's actually far from it. There's a lot of things you have to be good at in order to be a good guide. And one of them is you have to have the ability to listen. You have to have the ability to react to things that don't go your way and not throw a tantrum. And, you have to be professional. And, so I try and mentor as many young guides as I can that send me messages about, well, I had this hunter and he was doing this and this. I said, listen, you're the guide, you're in control. You have to explain and communicate with that hunter. If there's things that he's doing that's killing his opportunity, you don't go back to camp and tell the other guides behind his back. You take them aside and say, listen, moving your head up and down and all around when that bull's coming in is killing us. That bull is seeing you. This is between you and me, but you got to stop moving. Sometimes as a guide, you have to take the bull by the horns a little bit and say, listen, that cast you're making is killing us every time. You have to be a little bit more diligent on your cast. Or, elk hunting, you have to pick your position where you're going to set up when that bull is coming in. And when that bull is coming in, you've got to, be very, very still and let that elk walk by you before you, go to draw your bow. And, I think if people would communicate, guides, hunters would communicate with each other more, that a lot of these situations would be avoided.
Yeah. So, you get your good references, and you feel like that the guide that you have contacted is a good guide, and you're going to choose him for your hunt. Let's talk a little bit about what questions you might ask the guide before your trip, and then also talk about hunter etiquette as well. And because I know I grew up around my dad owns a fishing lodge on Lake Fork, bass fishing, and so we had a lot of guides in over the years, and I know that a lot of those guides have plenty of stories where the dude that hardly fishes at all is like, why don't we go over there and fish? And it's like, well, because I've never seen anybody catch a fish over there in 26 years that I've been fishing this lake. It's kind of like sometimes you get that aspect as well from the hunter. So maybe talk about, like I said, the questions that you might ask your guide going into the hunt, how often maybe you should contact him ahead of time and when, and then also a little bit of etiquette for the hunter.
Yeah, I think the questions you need to ask are, how long have you been guiding in the area that we're going to be hunting? Have you had successful trips and unsuccessful trips? How much scouting do you plan on doing before the hunt? How well do you know that area? How well do you know the animal that we're hunting? Do you have any time commitments that are going to make you want to, get in and get out? Are you in it to win it? Are you in this hunt? Are you dedicated to this hunt the entire time, whether it's a, 5-day hunt, 7-day hunt, 10-day hunt, 14-day hunt? Questions of, do you have any family commitments or responsibilities that, 3 days in, you're going to be trying to get me to shoot something because, you've got something to do with your wife or your kids, or, a lot of times if the guide's totally nervous, he's like, I've got the 14-day, but on the 4th day of the hunt, I have to be at my, kid's dance recital. Just tell them, communicate that and say, listen, I'm going to give you 14 days of, the best hunt you've ever had, but I have to leave midday on that one day and I'll be back that night. Those things can be, totally circumvented if you have good communication and instead of the guide getting all uptight and the hunter going, well, why is he so uptight? If he would have just said, hey, at noon, I've got to run into town, I'll be back. Probably everything's going to be fine. But, a big thing is how many hunts have you done in this particular unit or on this property or in this, specific area? How much experience do you have? And, and if the outfitter doesn't want you to talk to the guide right there, that's a red flag to me. That's a red flag because that's the outfitter trying to hide something. And, you don't want situations like that. So, if the outfitter's being funny and won't let you talk to the guide, that's a serious red flag. But, it all comes down to experience in the field with that particular animal in that particular area and how successful have you been. And, if you get the story, right away, red flags will go up if you talk to the guide and he's like, yeah, I've been guiding in here 10 years, but I've yet to kill a bull. My guys just can't shoot. They can't hit anything. Well, that throws up a red flag of, hey, the guide did not put the hunter in a good enough position to succeed. And that's your number one job as a guide, is to put the hunter in a situation where they can succeed. If they miss the shot, it's the guide's fault as well. I'm a firm believer. And I've had people miss 15-yard shots that are standing still. But the reality is I've missed those myself. So the guides, when you're talking to these guides, you have to get the sense of, is this person an egomaniac? Is this person genuine? Is he real? Is he truly invested in my hunt and want the success for me? Because if they're not, I want to get someone that's fully invested and, truly wants to see me succeed. As far as etiquette, do you mean etiquette with guides, with other guides, or fill me in on that a little bit?
No, sure. More like as a hunter, how you should act towards your guide. Because like I said, I was on that sheep hunt and I got to observe that as a third party, and it was refreshing to see how much the hunter that I was filming trusted our guide to do his job when, we were slow to move on sheep and stuff like that. So,
yeah. And so, you've spent the money and you've hired the guide to be the guide. And, over my 20s, now it was probably close to 30 years of, guiding, there have been some circumstances where I've literally had to step in and say, listen, you paid me for my expertise, so you need to let me do my job. And if you don't want to let me do my job, then, I can just take you back. And, I've had to have some pretty frank conversations, very few, but a few, several. And once we've had that conversation, everything's gone great. You don't want to guide the guide. You've hired that person because you have felt that person knows more than you. The last thing you want to do as a hunter is show up and start directing traffic and telling the guide what to do. You're not going to agree with your guide at all times. but you have spent the money and you've done the research and said, this is the guy that I'm going to put my faith in. You've got to put your faith in him. The worst thing you can do with a guide or an outfitter is start second guessing them and having a bad attitude and, you know, walking slowly and pouting and getting your lip out. And, you know, there's been times when I've guided where I've made a huge mistake and we've, you know, moved when we shouldn't have moved and blown the whole thing. And a good guide is a guy that's the first guy to say, I screwed that up. But guess what? It's not going to happen very much. And just trust me, we're going to get into them again and I'm going to make it happen. Mm-hmm. So you definitely don't want to guide the guide. You definitely want to trust the guide. And that's where a lot of these beefs come in, where, you know, you've got hunters that think they're better than they are. You've got hunters that think that, you know, they know more than they do. And that's where, you know, the rub can be. And I try and, when I'm going to guide someone, I try and ask questions as well to make sure that I'm not getting into a situation where someone's going to come in and tell me how to do things, because they're hiring me for my expertise, not to tell me how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you are a guide, and you've done plenty of stuff, and I know you've seen plenty of people who come in and are successful as being clients and who are complete failures and everything in between. Are there things you like to see as a guide that somebody shows up as, and, you know, maybe they show up and they're in good shape, or maybe they show up and they have good boots, or they have the right type of arrow and broadhead set up? You know, what does that look like?
I like a guy that comes in that says, you know, the hunt is the end result of this hunt, you know, the size of the animal or certain this, that, or the other doesn't dictate how my hunt's going to go. I like a guy that comes in, and when I go on guided hunts myself, when I'm the hunter and I'm going on a guided hunt, I try and be the guy that's always there, that is, you know, helping out, has a good attitude, has a smile when things aren't going right, can crack a joke and lighten the mood. And because let's face it, a lot of times on these 14-day hunts, it's not always going to go great. And a lot of times it's a grind. And, you know, the best guys that I've guided are the guys that, you know, when we all know that we both made a huge mistake, we just smile, laugh, and say, let's get them the next time. The worst scenario is, you know, a guy that's just, you know, gets his dauber in the dirt and pouting and walking slow and, you know, being short and not answering you. And, you know, you ask him, well, you know, what happened? He's, you know, just a bad attitude. The best thing you can do as a hunter is show up with a great attitude, show up in shape, know your equipment, and be ready for the circumstances and smell the roses a little bit. I think, you know, a lot of these hunts, you know, they're, whether they be high dollar hunts that you know, you drew a great tag and a great unit, and the pressure is so great that you forget to have a good time and you forget to just enjoy all the little things about a hunt. And, you know, I'm a guy who, when I hunt personally, I love to kill big animals. I love to kill the biggest, baddest, most mature, just biggest animal that walks. And I do it with great intensity, but I also like to have fun. And I also like to just, you know, try and have a good time and enjoy all of the grind of that hunt. Because, you know, we've all had hunts where you go out and you shoot the big giant on the first day, and we've had them where you go out and shoot them on the 14th day, and had a ton of them where you don't get anything at all. Mm-hmm. So I look at hunting more as not the end result, more as just the adventure and the excitement. You know, a good example, in 2018, I bought a hunt, my first personal sheep hunt in the Northwest Territories at Arctic Red. We did 67 miles in 9 days, saw 19 rams, and I never pulled the trigger. Didn't see a 10-year-old plus ram. That's what they like to kill there. And, you know, I chose not to shoot one. And, you know, that's a lot of money. And most guys would say, you know, I'm coming home with something regardless. You know, the last day I'm shooting whatever. That's just never been me. I've never been one of those guys that want to just get something to prove that, oh, I can, you know. And I think that's one thing I see going around these days. It's kind of disheartening, is that people have to shoot something in order to prove that they can do it. Mm-hmm. I think when you mature as a hunter enough, you kind of get over the point that, getting a big animal is we all want one, but it's not always going to happen. And a couple weeks later, I had drawn a tag. Ironically, I'd already bought a tag in Northwest Territories. And wouldn't you know it, I find out that I drew a tag in Alaska in the Chugach and went up there and had, a similar grind of a hunt and got an 11-year-old, big double broomer ram. And, people ask me, well, obviously you liked the Alaska hunt way better. I said, no, they were both fantastic. And I'm glad I went on both. And, not getting one the first trip, I still had an unbelievable time. I would go back in a heartbeat. And, I remember as much about that hunt as I do the one where I got the big old giant ram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome stuff. And it's cool that you can, after having years and years of experience being a guide, you can still go and be the hunter and be guided. That takes a lot of maturity. So it's, kudos to you to be able to still do a thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we as hunters and as guides and as people, human beings in general, when we stop learning and when we start thinking that we know everything, that's when it's a real slippery slope. I mean, there's not a time that I don't go out fishing or hunting, go out in the outdoors, that I love going with other people, seeing how they do things, seeing how they tie their knots and seeing how they, row their boat and see how they, do their different things, and that I learn. Mm-hmm. And I think the second that you get the attitude that you know everything and you don't, you can't, I can learn something from literally anybody. I can learn something that's been fishing for a month, and I can learn someone that's been hunting for a month. You can always learn something from someone.
Yeah, that's a huge point, man. So on that note, you've seen a lot of equipment in your day, I'm sure. Guys coming in with every new cool gadget or whatever. Mostly I'm an archery elk hunter. That's all I've ever really done. I'm not that I'm against rifle stuff or whatever, but through the years, I've had different experiences with different things, and it's really led me to shoot, heavy arrows, heavy broadheads. I'm using the Day 6 stuff right now and really, really like that stuff, and that seems to be the most effective on elk. But kind of as the broader concept, like, have you seen that there are different types of equipment that do work better in those scenarios, or is it always fool's gold when the next greatest and coolest new thing comes out when it comes to, equipment?
Well, I'm one of these guys. I'm always very, very leery of the guy that has to have all of the new technology, all of the new stuff. And it's all about, I grew up skiing since I was 2 years old, skiing. And, I learned very early on that, the kids with the brand new skis and the brand new poles and the, new Bogner outfits and looking all, Obermeyer, this and that. And they're not the greatest skiers. I mean, a lot of times when, I played golf, competitively, played in college. I mean, I would go out on the course. I love to play, for dollar bills and, a couple dollar Nassau here and there. I loved it. I love competition. And I'd always look around and I'd see and I'd think, okay, and I can beat that guy. And I've never even seen him play. And then I see the guy with the old bag and kind of the clubs that are worn, and he's kind of got his hat on sideways, and his shirt's not a new one, and I'd be like, watch out for that guy. And it's the same thing with hunting. It's the same thing with fishing. Nothing against. I'm a firm believer in technology, but I'm a firm believer that it's the guy behind the bow. It's the guy behind the rifle. It's, the guy that's underneath the pack, more than the shiny pack or the fancy bow or the fancy arrows. And, I'm not a huge tinkerer. My hunting partner, Dar, loves to tinker with, reloading, and he's constantly messing with different arrows and fletchings and, doing all that different stuff. And that's great. But I think to a certain extent, you've got to watch. And, there's guys that love hunting because they just love all the preparation. And then when it comes to the hunt, after about 3 days, they're ready to go home. And, they've spent 3 months doing all the prep work, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own reason that they do things. But I always take technology and I need to prove it out. I need to make sure that it's better than what I'm using, whether it be fly rods or reels or, a good example is, I've been fishing, fly fishing for a long, long time. And, I'm still fishing a Sage, two-ish Sage XPs, a 4-weight and a 5-weight. They're 15, almost 20 years old, and I fish them great. I cast them fine, and I could go out and spend $1,500 on a brand new Sage rod every year. That's, in my opinion, not necessarily going to make me that much better of a fisherman. So with that being said, I love great equipment. I love great optics. I love, when it comes to finding animals, I love using a lot of the new technologies and a lot of the new equipment. But I caution people, especially in archery, I would rather have a guy that's got a 3-year-old bow that knows exactly how it shoots and he shoots it well under pressure than some guy that's just got he's been shooting a bow all summer and then a new one comes out and he gets it 2 weeks before the hunt and he's got no idea where it's going to hit.
Mm-hmm. Jay, you probably know some of those bow companies better than we do. Can you please tell them to stop releasing bows during hunting season? Because it's super stupid.
I think with all that being said, though, as a consumer, whether we're talking bows or golf clubs or tennis rackets or skis, it's a phenomenal time to be a consumer because there's a lot of great companies that are really pushing the envelope and pushing each other. And being able to have choices as a consumer, 50 years ago they didn't have near the choices that we do now. And so I encourage people to take advantage of new stuff and take advantage of technology. Just make sure you prove it out before you think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's nothing like shooting under pressure. There's nothing like, making it count when the pressure's on. And if you can, great. But I encourage you to use the equipment that you feel comfortable with and that you have faith in. Mm-hmm. I would much rather be guiding someone that's, got a 30-year-old rifle and shot it a lot, knows exactly what it's going to do than someone that's been tinkering around and, he shows up for the hunt and he's shooting flyers all over at 100 yards and you're just like, oh my gosh. I mean, I would rather have the guy with the beat up scope and the beat up rifle and, the beat up backpack and he lays down and you're like, this guy's going to shoot, tacks. I mean, this is a done deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, why are we like blessed with the most technology ever and like the greatest, and latest stuff? Like, I mean, crap, we have handheld maps like Onyx and stuff like that now. And you can look at all these harvest statistics and all that, but why do the statistics not really go up that much? Why are elk still just as good at getting away from us as they've always been?
Well, I just think they have that big of an advantage. I think they're just, a wild animal is a wild animal. And no matter how much equipment and technology you have, the elk still seem to reign supreme. And that's just the beauty of it. I mean, I think if it was easier, I think it would not be as fun of a sport as it is. And, I think a lot of the calls have come a long ways and, obviously the binoculars and the tripods and to be able to spot them from a long ways off and be able to kind of keep your eye on them comfortably. That's all made us better. But again, I think a lot of it comes down to you can have all the greatest gadgets in the world, but if you don't know how to use them and you don't, use your time efficiently and, I'm a huge proponent of making stocks on animals that have a high probability. And I think a lot of people have all this new fandangled equipment and just think they can plow in there and, an elk's nose is still never going to deceive them.
Yeah.
And you still have to do things right, no matter what equipment you have. And, I think the technology is just going to continue to get better. I think we're going to have better equipment, better chances to use equipment that's going to make us better. But I still think we got to go back to being as efficient as we can and go for high probability opportunities. Much like a fish, laying out their big 22, 23-inch brown trout, at the end of the run, just sipping dry flies. you can't just go flying in there and throw it a foot from his face and have him eat it. He will every once in a while, but you might want to sit there and watch him a while, figure out exactly what he's eating, and then wait for him to get in a position in the pool where you can make one cast and catch him. And that's a lot of how I look at, calling in bulls and with elk specifically, is make sure that you don't go after them if you're not in a high probability. You've got to play the odds, and they've got to be in a high percentage. You don't want to take a stab at them unless it's a high percentage opportunity.
Yeah. Wise words, man, for sure. Hey, are you going to be the trigger man any this fall?
I didn't draw any tags. I thought I was going to draw. I had 19 points in Arizona. I thought I was going to draw the Arizona Strip 13B for mule deer. I had about a 54% chance to draw. My wife's like, well, 54%, that's like either you do or you don't. I'm like, well, percentage-wise, I had a 54% chance to draw. Next year I should be 100%. I did not draw that. And of all the hunts, I may hunt a Mexico Coues deer, depending on how all of my other hunts and stuff stack up as far as guiding. But probably another year for me of just guiding. I've got a lot of points in Arizona for archery elk. I think I have 18, as a resident. So I'm pretty much going to be able to draw any elk tag I want here in the next couple of years. So I'm just trying to pick the right year and the right opportunity. So
yeah, that sounds pretty awesome, man. Are there still some open spots to do some Coues or some Goulds hunting with you down there this year?
So my Gould's turkey for 2021 are completely booked. Much of my 2020 season, because of COVID-19, we were able to kill 17 birds, but we were scheduled to shoot 75. And so most of those hunters got pushed to 2021. So as Gould's, I'm pretty well booked. I do have the opportunity for a few more Coues deer hunts if guys didn't draw anything and want to go on a January Coues deer hunt. For sure. And I'm already booking for 2022 for Gould's turkey as well.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, guys, if you didn't know already, the Jay Scott Outdoors podcast is probably the most comprehensive and best place to learn anything you want to know about Western outdoor stuff. So, Jay, thank you so much for all the information that you've shared with us through the years, man, and especially in this podcast. Like always, your wealth of knowledge, and just can't thank you enough, man.
Well, I appreciate you guys thinking of me and having me on, and wish you the best of success with your podcast. I'm glad to see it's going great. And it's always great to have great podcasts out there and getting lots of good information passed around. So kudos to you guys for keeping things going and having the success that you are. And again, thanks for having me on, and God bless both of you.
Sounds good, brother. Well, have a good season, man.
Okay, guys, take care.
Now that was some killer info. Don't forget to subscribe, and a 5-star review means a ton to us.
Remember, this is your element.
Living it.